The air in the old Victorian house always held a certain stillness, a silence that seemed to absorb sound rather than reflect it. It was a silence Eleanor had come to both cherish and subtly fear over the years. Now, as the late afternoon sun cast long, skeletal shadows across the worn Persian rug in the living room, that silence felt heavier, pregnant with unspoken truths. Eleanor sat by the window, a half-empty teacup cooling in her hands, her gaze fixed on the meticulously manicured garden outside. To the casual observer, she might have appeared the picture of domestic tranquility, a woman enjoying the quiet hours before her husband, Arthur, returned from his demanding work as a city architect. But beneath the serene facade churned a secret so profound, so audacious, it threatened to shatter the very foundations of her carefully constructed life. Arthur was a creature of routine, a man whose life unfolded with the predictable precision of a Swiss timepiece. Every weekday, he left their suburban home at precisely 7:15 a.m. and returned no later than 6:30 p.m. Their weekends were equally structured. Saturday mornings at the local farmers' market, Sunday afternoons spent reading in their respective studies. This predictability had once been a comfort to Eleanor, a solid anchor in the often turbulent seas of her own emotions. Now, it was the very framework that allowed her secret to flourish, a clandestine life lived in the carefully carved-out spaces of Arthur's predictable absences. The other man in Eleanor's life was Daniel, a charismatic and free-spirited artist she had met quite by chance during a weekend trip to a quaint coastal town 3 years prior. Daniel was everything Arthur was not: spontaneous, passionate, and unbound by the rigid constraints of societal expectations. Their connection had been immediate and intense, a whirlwind of stolen moments and whispered promises under moonlit skies. What began as an unexpected affair had, over time, morphed into something far more complex and emotionally demanding. Eleanor found herself deeply in love with both men, in completely different yet equally compelling ways. The logistics of maintaining two separate marriages were, to say the least, intricate. Eleanor had become a master of scheduling, a virtuoso of deception. She had 2 separate cell phones, each dedicated to one of her lives. Her calendar was a labyrinth of coded entries and carefully orchestrated travel plans. She invented business trips, visits to fictitious relatives, and weekend retreats with non-existent girlfriends. Each lie was a delicate thread in a web of deceit that grew larger and more precarious with each passing day. Her marriage to Arthur had been a comfortable one, built on shared history and mutual respect. They had met in their early 20s, their relationship blossoming slowly but steadily. Arthur was kind, dependable, and successful, everything Eleanor had believed she wanted in a partner. Their life together was one of quiet contentment, punctuated by the occasional dinner party with friends and annual vacations to familiar destinations. There was a deep affection between them, but perhaps the fiery passion had faded over the years, replaced by a warm, steady ember. Daniel, on the other hand, ignited a fire in Eleanor she thought had long been extinguished. Their relationship was a passionate tempest, full of intense emotions and exhilarating experiences. He saw a different side of her, a more adventurous and sensual woman she had almost forgotten existed. Their time together was precious and fleeting, often stolen in rented apartments or secluded countryside inns, each goodbye leaving a sharp ache of longing. The emotional toll of her double life was immense. Eleanor constantly battled guilt and anxiety. The fear of discovery loomed over her like a dark cloud, threatening to unleash a storm that would destroy everything she held dear. She often found herself caught in a web of conflicting emotions, torn between her love for Arthur and her passionate connection with Daniel. There were nights she lay awake, the weight of her secret pressing down on her chest, wondering how long she could possibly sustain this impossible balancing act. Yet, despite the inherent risks and emotional turmoil, Eleanor felt trapped. She couldn't imagine her life without either man. The thought of hurting Arthur, of shattering his trust and the life they had built together, was unbearable. Equally devastating was the idea of losing Daniel, of extinguishing the vibrant spark he had reignited within her. She was caught in a paradox of her own making, a prisoner of her own desires and choices. There were moments, fleeting and fragile, when Eleanor allowed herself to dream of a different reality, a world where she didn't have to live a lie. She fantasized about confessing everything, about the impossible scenario where both men might somehow understand, even forgive her. But these were just fleeting fantasies, quickly dismissed by the cold, hard reality of her situation. The truth, she knew, would be catastrophic. The weight of her secret was beginning to manifest in subtle ways. Eleanor found herself increasingly withdrawn, prone to mood swings and bouts of unexplained sadness. Arthur, ever the attentive husband, had begun to notice. He would often ask if she was all right, his brow furrowed with concern. Each time, Eleanor would offer a carefully crafted explanation. Stress at work, a convenient lie she had fabricated, a lingering headache, general fatigue. Arthur, trusting and unsuspecting, always accepted her explanations, but Eleanor could sense a growing unease in his eyes, a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher. Daniel, too, sensed a shift in Eleanor. He noticed her increasing anxiety, the way she would sometimes pull away during their intimate moments, her mind seemingly elsewhere. He would press her gently, asking if something was wrong, but Eleanor was careful to reveal nothing of her other life. She couldn't bear the thought of losing him, of confessing the truth and watching the light in his eyes dim with disappointment and betrayal. As the shadows in the living room grew longer, Eleanor sighed, the weight of her secret pressing down on her. She knew that she couldn't continue living this way indefinitely. Something had to give. The precarious balance she had so carefully maintained was beginning to waver, and she could feel the tremors of an impending collapse. The question was not if her secret would be revealed, but when and what the devastating consequences would be. The comfortable silence of the old Victorian house suddenly felt menacing, a deceptive calm before an inevitable storm. The delicate dance of Eleanor's double life, once a thrilling, albeit terrifying, performance, began to show cracks. It wasn't a sudden fracture, but a slow, insidious erosion, like water wearing down stone. The stress had started to etch itself onto her features, leaving faint lines around her eyes and a perpetual tightness in her jaw. The vibrant spark Daniel had admired in her was dimming, replaced by a guardedness, a weariness that even he, with his boundless optimism, couldn't ignore. One Tuesday, an ordinary Tuesday that would forever be etched in Eleanor's memory, as the day the ground began to shift beneath her feet, Arthur called. He called her at the exact time he always called when he was stuck in traffic, 5:45 p.m. But this time his voice held an unusual strain. "Eleanor," he began, his tone clipped, "I need to ask you something." Her heart seized. She was at Daniel's apartment, an unfamiliar blanket draped over her, the scent of his oil paints still lingering in the air. A sudden, irrational fear gripped her. Had Arthur found something? Had a misplaced receipt, a forgotten text message, finally betrayed her? "What is it, Arthur?" she managed, her voice a little too steady. "Remember that business trip you took last month? The one to Boston?" Eleanor's mind raced. Boston. Yes, she had told him she was attending a marketing conference there. A quick, perfectly constructed lie, complete with fabricated brochures and hotel confirmations. "Yes, of course," she replied, trying to sound casual, as if discussing the weather. "Well," Arthur continued, a pause that stretched into an eternity. "I was at a client dinner tonight, and I ran into Mark Jennings from the accounting department. He mentioned he saw you in San Diego, at a different conference. Said he even tried to say hello, but you seemed to be in a hurry." The blood drained from Eleanor's face. San Diego. That was where she had spent a blissful, clandestine week with Daniel. A creative retreat, she had told Daniel. A solo trip to visit an old college friend, she had told Arthur. Mark Jennings, the quiet, unassuming man Arthur often played golf with. Of all the people in the vast expanse of the world, why him? Why now? San Diego? Eleanor forced a laugh, a brittle, unconvincing sound. "Arthur, you must be mistaken. I was definitely in Boston. Mark must have seen someone who looks like me. He seemed pretty sure, Eleanor." Arthur's voice was devoid of emotion now, a flat, dangerous calm. He said he recognized your red scarf. The one I bought you for your birthday. The red scarf. A small detail, but a devastating one. It was true. She had worn that scarf, a vibrant splash of color against the subdued tones of her travel wardrobe, in San Diego. A gift from Arthur worn while with Daniel. The irony was a cruel twist of the knife. Eleanor stammered, her usual quick wit abandoning her. Arthur, I don't know what to say. Perhaps Mark was confused. It happens. It's a common scarf. Is it, Eleanor? Arthur's voice was chillingly low. Or is there something else you'd like to tell me? The line went silent, heavy with unspoken accusations. Eleanor's mind was a whirlwind of panic. She mumbled something about a bad connection, about calling him back, and hung up. Her hand trembled as she stared at the phone, the cold reality of her situation crashing down on her. Arthur knew, or at least he suspected. The careful facade was crumbling. Daniel walked into the living room then, a sketchbook in his hand, a soft smile on his face. Everything all right, my love? You look like you've seen a ghost. Eleanor stared at him, tears welling in her eyes. How could she explain? How could she shatter this beautiful, fragile world they had built together? The thought of revealing the truth, of admitting she was already married, was unbearable. He loved her with such an open, trusting heart. The betrayal would crush him. She swallowed hard, forcing a watery smile. Just a rough day at work. You know how it is. Daniel, sensing her distress, put down his sketchbook and pulled her into a comforting embrace. Tell me about it, he murmured, stroking her hair. Or just let me hold you. In that moment, nestled in Daniel's arms, Eleanor felt an overwhelming surge of both love and despair. She was trapped, caught between two lives, two men, and the impending catastrophe that threatened to engulf them all. The truth, once a distant threat, was now breathing down her neck. Over the next few days, the tension in the Victorian house was palpable. Arthur maintained a quiet, watchful demeanor. He didn't confront Eleanor directly again about San Diego, but his silences were louder than any accusation. He would watch her across the dinner table, his eyes holding a question she couldn't answer. He started coming home later, sometimes citing unexpected meetings, other times offering no explanation at all. Eleanor noticed he had begun to leave his phone in his study, rather than keeping it by his side, a subtle shift that spoke volumes. The comfortable predictability of their life had vanished, replaced by an unsettling ambiguity. Eleanor, desperate to regain some semblance of control, tried to appease Arthur. She cooked his favorite meals, suggested activities they used to enjoy together, tried to rekindle the warmth that had always defined their marriage. But it was like trying to breathe life back into a dying flame. Arthur was polite, distant, his eyes perpetually shadowed with suspicion. Then came the small, deliberate acts of probing. One evening, Arthur casually mentioned that his company was planning a team-building retreat. Somewhere with a beach, perhaps, he mused, looking at Eleanor with an unervingly direct gaze. Maybe San Diego. Would you like to come along, darling? Eleanor's stomach lurched. It was a test, a subtle, cruel test. Oh, Arthur, that sounds lovely, she said, forcing enthusiasm. But I'm afraid I have a prior commitment that weekend. A charity gala I promised to help organize. Another lie, seamlessly woven into the tapestry of deceit. Arthur simply nodded, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips. Of course, he said, his voice flat. Always so busy, aren't you, Eleanor? The pressure was mounting. Eleanor found herself making more mistakes, small slips of the tongue, momentary lapses in her carefully constructed narratives. She nearly called Arthur Daniel once, catching herself just in time, her heart leaping into her throat. She found herself forgetting which lie she had told which man, leading to frantic, whispered phone calls to herself, trying to remember the details of her invented alibis. Meanwhile, Daniel, oblivious to the unraveling of Eleanor's other life, grew more insistent. He spoke of a future together, of moving in, of building a life. He spoke of commitment, of being exclusive, of wanting to truly know every part of her. His earnestness, His pure devotion only amplified Eleanor's guilt. How could she tell him that the woman he loved, the woman who shared his dreams, was living a double life, bound by vows to another? One night, Daniel confessed something that chilled Eleanor to the bone. "I think I saw you a few weeks ago," he said casually, as they lay in bed, the city lights twinkling outside his window. "Downtown, near the financial district. You were with a man in a suit. I thought it was you, but you looked so different, so formal. I almost called out to you, but then I thought, no, it couldn't be my free-spirited Eleanor in a place like that." Eleanor's blood ran cold. It had been Arthur. She had been meeting him for lunch, a rare midday rendezvous that fit into their busy schedules. The financial district was Arthur's domain, a world Daniel had no part of. The close call, the near exposure, sent shivers down her spine. The two worlds were colliding, inching closer with each passing day. The precarious balance was now tipping precariously. The fear of being discovered by Arthur was suffocating, but the thought of devastating Daniel was equally unbearable. She was cornered, trapped in a web of her own making, and the strands were tightening. The serene facade of Eleanor's life was not just cracking. It was shattering, piece by agonizing piece. The question of if was long gone. Now it was only a matter of how soon and how catastrophic. The quiet hum of dread in the old Victorian house had grown into a roar, a warning of the impending storm. The air in the Victorian house became thick with unspoken tension, a silence more oppressive than any argument. Arthur's distant politeness had hardened into something cold, almost hostile. His subtle questions had escalated into pointed remarks, laced with an unnerving undertone. Eleanor felt like she was constantly walking on thin ice, each breath a careful calculation, each word a potential misstep. The carefully constructed world she inhabited was not just cracking. It was on the precipice of shattering. One crisp autumn evening, as Eleanor was preparing dinner, the familiar scent of roast chicken filling the kitchen, Arthur walked in. He wasn't in his usual work clothes. He wore a casual sweater, but his demeanor was anything but relaxed. He held a small, elegantly wrapped gift box in his hand. "Eleanor," he said, his voice flat, devoid of its usual warmth. "I have something for you." Eleanor's stomach clenched. A gift? After weeks of icy silence and veiled accusations, this felt ominous. She took the box, her fingers trembling slightly as she unwrapped it. Inside lay a delicate silver locket. It was beautiful, intricately engraved with a floral pattern, but its beauty held a chilling weight. "It's beautiful, Arthur," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. "Open it," he instructed, his eyes fixed on her, unblinking. With a growing sense of dread, Eleanor unlatched the locket. Inside, nestled on one side, was a tiny, faded photograph of Arthur and her from their wedding day, their faces beaming with youthful hope. On the other side, a blank space. But it wasn't empty. Etched into the silver, almost imperceptibly, were two dates. Their wedding anniversary, and then, below it, another date, the date of her clandestine San Diego trip with Daniel. Eleanor gasped, her breath catching in her throat. Her face paled. This wasn't a gift. It was an accusation, a precise, calculated strike. Arthur knew. He didn't just suspect. He had proof, or at least enough to corner her. What is this, Arthur?" she stammered, her voice shaking uncontrollably. Arthur stepped closer, his gaze unwavering, piercing. "It's a reminder, Eleanor. A reminder of commitment, of honesty, of the vows we took." He paused, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "And the date etched there? That's the day I realized you weren't who I thought you were. The day I realized you were living a lie." He leaned in, his voice a chilling whisper. "I followed you, Eleanor. Not just to San Diego, but other places too. The business trips, the charity galas. I saw you. With him. The artist." His eyes burned with a mixture of pain and cold fury. "I saw the way you looked at him, the way you laughed, the way you touched him." The air was sucked out of the room. Eleanor felt dizzy, her legs weak. All the carefully constructed walls she had built, all the elaborate lies, crumbled in an instant. The raw, undeniable truth stood before her, unveiled and devastating. "Arthur, please let me explain," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. He cut her off, his voice rising, sharp with betrayal. "Explain what, Eleanor? Explain how you could stand in front of me, day after day, living the charade? Explain how you could pretend to love me, while you were building a life with another man. Do you know what it feels like, Eleanor? To have your entire world, your entire history, revealed as a monumental lie." He gestured wildly around the living room, his voice filled with a profound anguish. "This house, our life, our memories, were they all just a convenient cover for your sordid little affair? Was I just a fool, a patsy, while you pursued your passions?" Eleanor sank onto a chair, burying her face in her hands, her body racked with sobs. The confrontation she had dreaded, the moment of reckoning, was here, and it was far more brutal than she had ever imagined. The pain in Arthur's voice was a physical blow, but the revelations weren't over. As Eleanor wept, Arthur's phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. He glanced at it, and a flicker of something unreadable crossed his face, a mix of grim satisfaction and renewed anguish. He picked it up and held it out to Eleanor. "And this, Eleanor, is the final piece of your masterpiece." It was an email open on his phone. The sender was an anonymous account. The subject line simply, "Your wife's secret." The body of the email was concise, chillingly accurate. It detailed Eleanor's 2 marriages, providing names, dates, and locations. It included photographic evidence, grainy, but unmistakable, photos of Eleanor with Daniel in various intimate settings. And most shockingly, it included a scanned copy of Eleanor and Daniel's marriage certificate, dated 2 years prior, from a small chapel in that same coastal town where they first met. Eleanor stared at the screen, her mind reeling. A marriage certificate? She had never married Daniel. They had talked about it, fantasized about a symbolic commitment, but they had never actually gone through with it. This was an elaborate, cruel fabrication. But who would go to such lengths? Who knew enough to piece together her fragmented lives? Arthur's voice, now dangerously calm, brought her back to reality. "I've hired a private investigator, Eleanor. A good one. They found everything. This email, it just confirmed what I already knew. The question is, why, Eleanor? Why all this?" His voice cracked. "And what about this marriage certificate? What is this, if not a legal union?" Eleanor looked up, her tear-streaked face contorted in confusion and terror. "Arthur, I swear I never married Daniel. This is a lie. I don't know who sent you this, but it's not true." But Arthur was beyond listening. The evidence, meticulously gathered, seemed irrefutable. The locket, the follow-ups, the email, the photos, and now the forged marriage certificate. To him, it was a damning indictment. Just then, the doorbell rang. A sharp, insistent sound that cut through the agonizing silence. Arthur looked at the door, then back at Eleanor, his eyes narrowed. "Perhaps," he said, his voice laced with bitter irony, "it's your other husband come to join our little family gathering." Eleanor's heart hammered. Could it be Daniel? Had someone, the same anonymous sender, reached out to him too? The thought of both men, her entire life, collapsing around her in one calamitous moment, was almost too much to bear. Arthur walked to the door and opened it. Standing on their porch, looking disoriented and pale, was Daniel. He held a crumpled piece of paper in his hand, an identical email printout. His eyes, usually so full of warmth and artistic passion, were wide with shock and confusion as they darted from Arthur's grim face to Eleanor's tear-stained one. "Eleanor." Daniel's voice was a shaky whisper. "What is this? Who is this man?" The 2 worlds had violently collided. The secret was out, not just to one, but to both men, and the architect of her elaborate deception was now trapped in the ruins of her own making. The silence that followed was deafening, a prelude to the hurricane that was about to unleash its full fury. The carefully constructed life, once a labyrinth of cunning, was now an open wound, bleeding out for all to see. The truth, in all its devastating glory, had finally arrived. The silence in the living room stretched, taut and agonizing, broken only by Eleanor's ragged sobs and the strained breathing of the two men who now stood on opposite sides of her shattered world. Daniel, still clutching the crumpled printout, looked from Arthur to Eleanor, his face a mask of disbelief. Arthur, grim and rigid, watched Eleanor with a cold, unforgiving gaze. The air crackled with the wreckage of a life meticulously constructed and violently torn apart. Eleanor, Daniel finally managed, his voice raw with pain. What is he talking about? Who is he? His eyes, once so full of adoration, now held a bewildered hurt that pierced Eleanor's very soul. Arthur stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. I am her husband, Daniel. Arthur Davies. We've been married for 15 years. He held up the silver locket, the dates etched on its surface glinting in the dim light. And this, he added, indicating the email printout in Daniel's hand, is the proof of her other life, the one she built with you. Daniel's head snapped towards Eleanor, his eyes wide with horror. Married? Eleanor, is this true? All this time, you were married. He shook his head, as if trying to clear a terrible fog. But we were going to get married. We talked about a future, about moving in together. Eleanor could only shake her head, tears streaming down her face. Words failed her. How could she possibly explain the intricate web of deceit, the layers of emotional complexity that had led her to this agonizing precipice? The weight of her choices, of the pain she had inflicted, was crushing her. Arthur, seeing Daniel's profound shock, seemed to derive a bitter satisfaction. She's quite the actress, isn't she, Daniel? A master of illusion. She fooled us both. His voice was laced with venom, yet beneath it, a deep, lacerating wound of betrayal. The confrontation spiraled, not into shouting, but into a chilling exchange of fractured truths and desperate denials. Daniel, reeling, demanded answers. Eleanor, trapped and broken, could only offer fragmented apologies and pleas for understanding. The fabricated marriage certificate, sent by the anonymous source, hung like a phantom limb, an undeniable piece of evidence that deepened the chasm between them. I didn't marry him, Daniel, Eleanor choked out, pointing at the printout. This isn't real. I swear it. Daniel looked at the certificate, then at Eleanor, his face twisting in confusion. But it has our names, a date, a chapel address. How can it not be real, Eleanor? Why would someone? He trailed off, the implications dawning on him. Someone had meticulously orchestrated this reveal, not just for Arthur, but for him too. Arthur scoffed. A desperate lie, Eleanor, just like all the others. The evening dissolved into a maelstrom of accusations, tears, and the agonizing unraveling of a carefully constructed reality. By the time the first rays of dawn crept through the living room windows, painting the scene in a cold, gray light, the outcome was clear. Arthur, his face etched with unspeakable pain and resolve, stood firm. I want a divorce, Eleanor. Immediately. And I want you out of this house by the end of the week. His voice was devoid of emotion, a finality that brooked no argument. His life, his trust, had been irreparably shattered. The man who had been a creature of predictable routine had been forced to confront an unpredictable, devastating truth, and his world had been irrevocably altered. Daniel, heartbroken and profoundly disillusioned, looked at Eleanor with a sorrow that cut deeper than any anger. I can't believe this, Eleanor. Everything we had. Was it all a lie? He didn't wait for an answer. He simply turned and walked out, the door closing softly behind him, a final, definitive click that echoed the sound of Eleanor's world imploding. He was an artist, a dreamer, and the brutal reality of Eleanor's deception was a wound that would surely fester. He had envisioned a future of vibrant colors. Instead, he was left with shades of gray. Eleanor was left alone in the wreckage, surrounded by the ghosts of her two lives. The beautiful Victorian house, once a sanctuary of her deception, now felt like a mausoleum. The silence, which she had once used as a shield, was now a deafening roar of emptiness and regret. In the aftermath, the truth, as it always does, slowly emerged. The anonymous email, the forged marriage certificate, it was later discovered to be the work of a bitter, disgruntled former colleague of Arthur's, who had observed Eleanor and Daniel together by chance and, fueled by a desire for revenge against Arthur for a past slight, had decided to meticulously expose Eleanor's secret in the most devastating way possible. They had studied Eleanor's habits, her travel patterns, and had meticulously crafted the evidence, even going so far as to create a fake marriage certificate, knowing it would be the ultimate, undeniable blow. The full extent of this third party's involvement was a further twist, a macabre puppeteer pulling the strings of Eleanor's life towards its inevitable, catastrophic climax. Eleanor did leave the house by the end of the week. She moved to a small, nondescript apartment in a different city, a place where no one knew her or her past. She tried to reach out to Daniel, but her calls went unanswered, her messages unread. He had vanished from her life as completely as he had entered it, leaving behind only the poignant memory of a love that was tragically built on sand. Her divorce from Arthur was swift and unemotional. The years of shared history, the comfortable routine, the quiet affection, all dissolved into a legal document, a testament to a love poisoned by deceit. Arthur never spoke to her again. Eleanor was left with a chilling solitude, a profound sense of loss, and the haunting question of why. Why had she risked everything? Was it the thrill of the forbidden, the escape from the mundane, or a deeper, unfulfilled craving within herself? She spent her days in quiet reflection, wrestling with the complexities of her own heart, the allure of passion versus the comfort of stability, and the ultimate price of living a lie. The story of Eleanor serves as a chilling reminder of the intricate and often devastating consequences of deception. It's a tale of how secrets, once sown, can grow into an impenetrable jungle, trapping not only the deceiver but also those they claim to love. It explores the dark corners of the human heart, where longing and fear can intertwine to create a life built on quicksand. What began as a thrilling escape, a way to experience two profoundly different forms of love, ultimately led to a singular, devastating isolation. Eleanor's tale is not just about a woman who had two husbands. It's about the silent screams of a heart torn between conflicting desires, and the echoes of shattered trust that reverberate long after the truth comes to light. It's a somber reflection on the choices we make, the paths we walk, and the unavoidable reality that some secrets are simply too heavy to carry. If Eleanor's story resonated with you, or if you've ever found yourself caught in a web of difficult choices, share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into complex human stories, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next upload. Until then, stay curious and always seek the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it may be.